wanted to welcome all of you to Chai with Viji. I'm Viji. I am an Ayurvedic birth expert, and I have a small healthcare practice where I support women through the various thresholds of their life. Every first Sunday of the month, I do a Chai with Viji on various topics. And January, February, and March, we are doing a series called The Cyclical Woman, and this is month 2. And in last month's January Chai with Viji, we talked about the truth of the bleed and how menstruation or our periods isn't just a reflection of reproductive health, but it's information about the rest of our body. So today we're going to widen that lens into, commonly I think what either people get confused about or know about the different phases of our cycle. And one of the most important questions that someone actually asked me was, is this just for women who want to get pregnant? But the truth is that the phases that we go through in our life, and especially our this like reproductive cycle that we go through or how we see as reproductive isn't just about reproductive, and we actually go through it when we are in that early phase of life and reproduction, as well as perimenopause time, the time of transition, and menopause. So I'm so excited to actually go into this. And so my aim today really is to look at the 4 phases in this new way, because it's actually not new, but it's a new way perhaps that we will think about it. You all who have attended before know I always discuss these 5 pillars of healing that I utilize as a scaffold, when I work with my clients and even with myself. And so this morning, we're not just going to learn about the hormones, what are they, and the phases. While that's important, it's really about going inwards and trying to see how we experience these in real life. So we'll be going through actually these pillars in a very, very tangible way, especially the first 3, which is about knowing about yourself, understanding, the context of, how things change during different phases of our life, and then, some tools to help us understand that and then implement in our own lives to support ourselves. So let's start with this, first part, which is self-awareness. And in Ayurveda, which is a medical science from India, and how I really, the lens that I use to support women and see these things, in Ayurveda, disease or health is not just looked at as the absence of symptoms, that we're not feeling anything that is bothering us. It's really, there's a Sanskrit word called svastha, and it really talks about the idea of being established in yourself. And really, that's the first pillar, being able to understand and recognize, who we are first. And so, and that really is about self-awareness. So we oftentimes think about our bodies as just kind of independent, organs, and when we especially when we have issues, we think about it as what's going on in this part. Let me address it. Let me take a medicine to support that, But the truth is, right, that we are, like we talked about last time, we're a systems organism. And so the idea is that we have to look at our bodies and ourselves as a whole, and not just, in the case of like menses or our cycles, just the reproductive system. So I want to bring this back because this is just so important to understand. And now I'm going to slow down a bit because this next couple of slides is not about information. It's about orienting ourselves. And I'm going to pause a lot to ask whether any of you have questions, because I've mentioned these topics before, and for those of you who haven't come before or don't have exposure to this way of thinking, it will be important that you chime up if you have any questions. So I want to talk about, again, bringing us kind of like expanding the lens out and to see how our bodies are formed, and especially the reproductive tissue, because the reproductive tissue is relevant to us, again, no matter which phase of life we are in. So Ayurveda understands that our bodies are being continuously built every moment. And basically what we intake into our body, and in that way, what do we digest and how we assimilate into our body is how our body is created. And I want to I'm going to stop at each phase so that we can kind of really absorb what I'm saying. So from the food that we eat, right? It's broken down, and then there's a transformation that occurs, and that the body creates plasma tissue. Now, this is really, really important to understand because there is an internal transfer. So what is plasma? It's like the nourishing fluid that exists, in our body, and it's very important actually to create blood. Because blood is actually the blood cells are within a system, a container, and that container is plasma. So if there isn't enough or there's less, then the blood is not going to be able to be created in the most healthiest of ways, right? And we're going to see at every step, how this is so important to understand. Okay, so from here. Like red blood cells or blood cells, are going to carry oxygen, they're going to carry nutrients, all sorts of things. And actually, it's so important that that is there, because otherwise your muscle tissue is not going to be formed. We need blood, like muscle cells depend upon oxygen, these kind of things. So the idea here is that our bodies are being created from the template that is being given by every step of the process. And as we continue, muscle is going to create fat is going to create bone, and then our nervous system tissue, our bone marrow, and then finally only our reproductive tissue. So this is really relevant because during different phases of our life, different parts of this process are actually affected. So before I go into that, this is why at every stage of this process, it is important to understand that if anything goes wrong, then how our reproductive tissue shows up, whether we don't bleed enough, whether we have pain, whether, or even in later years like menopause, or even before that in perimenopause, how kind of irregular our cycles are all dependent on this part, all of this. Right? So when we try to understand our cycles, we don't just look at the reproductive tissue, we look at every stage before. So in Ayurveda, life is divided into many stages. So we start, in the beginning of life, as you're born and as you grow, it's called the kapha stage. And this is where our bodies are being built, right? And now if we kind of view that from the lens of what's going on in our body, this is how or when our cycles get established. And so it's so important. This is why, eating good foods and nourishing, giving nutrient dense and high quality foods, not only to ourselves when we're pregnant, but also to our children and our families are really important. The next stage is called the pitta stage. And this is when, we're working, we're productive. There's a lot of hormonal and a lot of transformations that are occurring in the body. This is the time where our reproductive system is extremely active. This is when we are able to create life and sustain life. And I'm showing it in these stages because it mirrors. So as our body is being created, a large part of that building and growing is related to the plasma, the blood and the muscles that are building our body. And then really in terms of maintenance, we've got the fat, the bone, the marrow, as well as the reproductive tissue. Now, as we move to perimenopause and menopause time, this is called the Vata stage of life. And the energies of the body kind of shift a little bit. It's about utilizing what we have stored or what we give to our body and, try to maintain it. And this is the time, again, like I said, where we're in perimenopause and menopause. And what I'm trying to show here is that there is really an overlay in terms of how our bodies are created, what it is doing in terms of building, in terms of maintenance and supporting or integrating, and how even then throughout our life we go through the different stages. And I'm just curious, I just want to stop here a little bit because there's a lot of information here, whether any of you have any comments or any questions about this.
I have a question, Viji.
Yes.
So when you say that the first stage when you're building everything is the kapha, then the pitta and the vata, does it mean in a way that, okay, let's say that you haven't really focused so much on the body in the first two stages, does it mean that there's some part of it that is not repairable when you get to the third stage? Or, I'm trying to understand how much of it is impacted. Sorry.
Oh, that's a phenomenal question. And I think the beauty of our bodies and the beauty of life is that, so I'll answer it in twofold. It's just an amazing question. So the idea is that actually we are continuously building our bodies, right? And so if we fast forward, like you asked, to the later stages of our life, then the quality of the tissues that we have in our body are as a result of, kind of what we have built before. However, we have the opportunity, to kind of support it. And so that's why I love doing these chais, because I think it brings awareness to the fact that we do have so much agency and input into how we, can influence our health. Does that make sense, Divya?
Yes.
Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. A lot of times because women face or people face certain things in their life, like let's say in the later years, you're seeing weight gain. A lot of women talk about that pooch that they get, in their stomach. And then you avoid, for example, taking in good fats in your body, right? And later on, we will go over this again and again. Why is it that, especially during this time of transition in perimenopause, women are asked to do strength training, and focus on calcium, things like that? That is because all of this is very important to build our bodies. And so the idea is not that we want to avoid doing those things, but when we then, so actually we can. So when we do, for example, strength training, even if we are at a stage in our life where our bodies are slowing down and our bodies are not building, so that means we're not really actively creating more muscle, more bone, those kind of things. When you do, for example, strength training, you're kind of telling your body like, hey, we need to kind of, it activates the process again. So I guess what I would share with you is, yes, always what we do creates our body and the quality, of our body and our health. It's just fascinating because I think people don't realize why certain advice is given. This entire process is actually how our body forms. One is dependent upon the other. For example, like red blood cells are made in the bone marrow. So we, in order to have healthy blood, we need to have healthy bone. And people may not know that. So yeah. So now that we have kind of, so this is, I gave you one lens into understanding like your own body and how our body is interdependent, even internally. What we do absolutely will impact our health, and the fact that our bodies are interconnected. So what we do early on, or something unrelated to, for example, even our nervous system or even our reproductive health, is actually affected by what we eat and what we do early on in that process, because it builds our body almost sequentially. And so, but The other part of this, like I've mentioned many times, is that with that self-awareness, we need to understand how we change over time, and how we change over time is really the rhythms that our body has. So when we learn to understand the cycles that are both internal to us as well as external, then we're able to kind of see where we exist or what is influencing us in relation to our own health and our own cycles. So oftentimes we understand ourselves purely from a biological, perspective, right? And we've heard of all these words that literally come at us, especially if we are trying to troubleshoot some issues that we have. And I think it's so overwhelming. And we focus our attention on either fixing, optimizing, or controlling, which a lot of us do. And it can often feel like the cycle is something that happens to us, as opposed to showing us something about us. And so Ayurveda asks a very different question than all of these things, like what's wrong and what do I do? And it's more about thinking about how the cycle is something that we can optimize, how the cycle is something that can tell us about ourselves. And so throughout life, actually, there are 4 repeating movements that exist in the body, irrespective of or outside of even reproductive. It happens in every aspect of our life across our entire lifetime. And these are the following. So there is a process of clearing, there's a process of building, right? And there's a process of expressing, and then there's a process of integrating. And these are not states that, we achieve or that we fix, but they are states and energetics and movements that happen in our body that we participate in. And I can clearly, I know, like I said last time, in my own life, especially when I was younger, I don't think I ever paid attention to how these 4 phases actually really felt in the body. I would have only thought of it really, I just noticed the bleed, maybe what would have happened before, and really had no connection, this is when I was younger, to what was going on. And so I want to shift the paradigm a little bit for us to understand all of the words in the previous slide, to almost coalesce into an easy way of thinking about our own bodies and our own lives, and how we can use this understanding across all of the different phases that we will experience in our life, and all of the different processes that happen, digestion, elimination, everything. If we can really take a look at ourselves and understand the relationship that exists within ourselves. So it's ways in which we can understand how best our bodies can be met during all of these phases. So one of the things is that the cycle itself, right? It reflects how our body is clearing, how our body is building, how our body is expressing, and how our body is integrating. And so last time when we talked about the language of your cycle, and I showed the same slide, these are ways, this is the language in which our body tells us what's going on. And so again, it is important, oftentimes people keep a journal or a calendar and pay attention. I think it's really important because it tells us a lot about what's going on inside. So let's move now to the second pillar, right? So we learned about how we can almost like self-identify, how we can understand ourselves, what's going on, what do we pay attention to. Now it's about it's moving away from why something is happening to actually what is happening and what is the context of what is happening. So through time, like I mentioned, the body goes through 4 phases, right? One is clearing and building, expressing, and integrating. having these 4 phases, I want to bring in the language that all of us have heard from one time or another and try to kind of understand and superimpose them to see what is the bigger picture. So the clearing phase, as you could have imagined, is the menstrual phase. So this is when, it's a time of releasing, and in this phase, there's an energy that we call in Ayurveda called Apanavayu. But really, if I were to translate it, it is related to the downward moving energy that is in our body that facilitates this process. And so we have a energetic shift where the energies are moving inward as well as downward. And this is really where then like the hormones in our body withdraw because we don't have a baby to support, and then the body releases that. So the next phase, as everyone would have heard of, is related to the building phase, which is the follicular phase. So this is the time where the body is building the ability to reproduce. And again, even during menopause or perimenopause, we may not be building the ability to reproduce. However, there is communication that happens in the body that is about building, and it's a phase where we have to support that. So here, the energy is related to the plasma tissue, the rasa dhatu, and supporting building in our body, which is related to kapha, which I mentioned earlier. In more perhaps understandable language, people are familiar with, again, this is related to the plasma tissue and creating support or structure in our body. Okay, so the expressing phase is the ovulatory phase. And this is where the energy is outward and it's connective. So it's very expansive. So this is where, we're interacting with people. This kind of energy is important because if we do want to reproduce, we need to connect with, someone to be able to do that. And so it's looking for that connection to be able to do the next thing. And so in Ayurveda, this is related to what is known as Ritu or Kala, and that very much basically is the window in which there's fertility, and it's just a season of time, where we are communicating and exchanging, with others. Okay, and then the last phase is about integrating, and that's related to the luteal phase. This is the maintaining of our uterine lining so that we can sustain a baby if that's the stage that we're in. And here again, the focus here is about transformation and about holding. So in that way, we want to hold a baby in the system. And these 4 phases then work together, and happen. Now here I'm describing it related to the reproductive system, but this actually clearing, building, expressing, and integrating happens in every organ function cycle that exists in our body. Anybody have any questions on this or any thoughts?
Viji, I have a question.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure how to phrase this question, but I guess what I'm wondering is, what if the actions of these 4 phases are mixed up? Like there's holding in a part where there should be clearing, or there's clearing where there should be holding. I was just reflecting on my own experience with my menstrual cycle and realizing like that I feel like I'm holding in phases when that's not the natural energy, and I have trouble clearing, especially in the clearing phase, but maybe just in general. But just noticing and reflecting on my own experience.
The very simple answer to your question is what is supposed to happen in one phase either happens in another or doesn't happen. This is precisely where issues arise. Like you said, so if you have gotten to the point where you've paid attention and that you realize that some things are being mixed up, then you can actually shift the energy. So you can ask yourself, like in a phase that isn't holding? What am I holding on to? Is something going on in my body where it's, holding on to it? Or you are having quite a bit of like bleeding, which is an inflammatory response. And an inflammatory response in general is important because that's how we build the tissues in our body. That's how we build the uterine lining. But why am I overbuilding it? Why am I, like I'm having bleeding for 10 days as opposed to 3 days? So I think the experience and the visibility of those differences is what gives you the starting point to then go and change it. Did I answer that question? Because then we can do it through practices. We can see what energetics are not being implemented properly, whether it be through our food. That's where we can incorporate herbs that help, to either create better holding or to allow release in the cases that you shared. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
I tried to create, these slides, and then the one beforehand, or it's the same one, to just kind of show how, like, these aren't just words. They are actually, if you look into, like I said, every biological cycle that exists, it does very much mirror these 4 phases, right? In one way or another. The words, I gave one word which just brings in simplicity, but, and the nuance and the intricacy of each one of our organ systems, can kind of be delved into. But the idea is that when you're aware that this is kind of the flow that the body naturally and normally has, then you can almost, it can be like, okay, well, I kind of know what phase I'm going through right now. I know how energetically or even through actions or anything that I do, how I can support myself. And we'll talk about that like in the next couple of slides. So I think then just being aware, then shifting and doing things like, okay, well, I'm feeling this way or I'm doing this. Maybe I can implement 1 or 2 practices or things, to be able to shift that energy from holding to clearing, because that really is what needs to happen right now so that my body can let go. Last time, at the end of the chai, I was talking about 2 particular women who had one who wasn't experiencing bleeding and one who was experiencing bleeding literally every day without stop. That's very clearly kind of, some of the things that you're talking about, just, 2 opposite sides of the spectrum. And so in each one of those cases, it's just being able to identify why, why clearing isn't happening, why building isn't happening. And I know that sounds so much easier than said. And we have to look at it from every aspect, right? Whether, again, the diet, what are we putting into our body? What are we experiencing outward about stress? What are the practices that we do? Do we stay late up at night? Do we eat certain types of foods or have certain types of activities that are aggravating our bodies? And then, or has things happened to us emotionally, psychologically, that we can address so that our actual way in which we live and we hold ourselves and we do things, if that changes, then it will have a subsequent effect on the rest of our body. We oftentimes think that, what we're experiencing emotionally does not affect physiologically, but it's just another pillar of our body, and they all reflect each other. So thank you so much for the question. So let's actually move into this next part, which is utilizing the knowledge of these different phases and what the energetics are asking of us, and then what we can do to support that. And before I start, I just wanted to show, so I wanted to first lay the foundation of how Ayurveda approaches this. So the first thing, right, so if I were to just, there's so many aspects of our life, but if I were to put it into the bins of fertility, perimenopause, and menopause, the way that Ayurveda looks at things is to first ask ourselves, okay, so what is the nature of the time that I'm in right now? Whether it be, where am I in my cycle? what stage of life am I in, and what's like happening around me, right? And so it's just important. And for me, Kyla, going back to your question, I'm just one of those people who, I don't know if you can see on my wall, like I'll have things on my wall, or I'll have a to-do list, always, whether it be on my phone, my computer, my iPad, or I have a notebook. So always, and I probably write that, like, these are the questions that I should kind of always be asking myself. In the beginning, you'll be looking at the sheet of paper or the screen, to kind of know what those questions are. But then it becomes second nature, like, hey, what's going on? Let me take a step back. What's going on? And then the second thing is, so like, what are the qualities that are that I'm experiencing right now? So like, and these are the qualities. This is why Ayurveda understands, like, we describe everything in the world through the lens of qualities. So is something dry? Is something hot? Is something heavy? Is it mobile? Sensitive? So what's going on? And that again is where we have to bring in our awareness to understand, is it cold outside? Is it dry outside? Would I be better suited in a different environment? But first, before we even ask that question, what are the qualities that I am experiencing through every means? I just mentioned the weather, and the temperature, but everything has some kind of influence on us. And then the third is, again, like, where is the energy oriented? Where should it be oriented? And so is the energy that is kind of, I'm either experiencing or should be experiencing at this time, is it inward? Is it outward? Is it building? Is it releasing? Is it expressing? Is it integrating? So these are the things that we can ask ourselves. And then, and only then, have we gone through this, do we then say, okay, well, how do I bring in support to help myself? What could bring balance from what I'm experiencing to maybe what I should be experiencing, or what is best for me to experience during this time? And what I want to do now is I want to go into each stage and see how we can understand them through this lens. So I'm gonna, like overlay this onto, the clearing phase, the building phase, the expressing phase, and the integrating phase. Okay, so in the menstrual / clearing phase, and I very specifically, because it almost will seem like, wait a minute, why are you putting menstrual phase during even, and then putting menopause in the same slide? So this is why it's just so important that these words are understood together. So so that we can understand that it's really just more than one thing. So we'll start at the bottom, right? So in fertility, in the early part of our life, like, what's going on? So obviously, this is a time where we're trying to conceive, and the most like visible way that kind of happens is through our menstrual cycles and our bleed. And we've got hormones that are, that have been fluctuating, that are now dropping, and the lining of our uterus needs to be released. In perimenopause, still we still have our hormones, and they are fluctuating, but they're fluctuating in a different way. They're a bit irregular here, and so even here, clearing needs to happen. It's just that how it happens is a bit different. We're still having our periods, but it's irregular. It may not come every month, and sometimes you will experience it as not coming at all, and then suddenly having an extremely heavy bleed or just some spotting. So the clearing aspect doesn't completely go away in this perimenopause phase. And, it's interesting because it may seem like I'm trying to do a lot. I mean, I often think I'm trying to do a lot when I'm trying to, talk about fertility, perimenopause, and menopause at the same time. But it just goes to show you that even if we just pay attention to the basics, we are really going to be helping ourselves, because we are all going to go through all of these phases, right? And so it just helps us to orient ourselves that it's so important to understand this, and you then can be able to implement it, or you can implement it throughout your life. So in the menopause state, obviously, that's the time when our bodies are no longer bleeding. And again, this idea of clearing, right? You may ask, well, then if I'm not bleeding, then how can I, clear? And it's more that what happens in menopause is that it's a much, much longer arc of clearing. And it has to do with the other, systems in our body, again, like digestion or sleep, our emotions, our nervous system. And so we still have to understand, kind of what happens to us and be able to clear, whether that be just the idea of letting go or paying attention to how we release things, in our body. It's very important. Hopefully I'll go a little bit, I don't know what time it is, but yes, I'll go a little bit faster throughout the other arcs. But so the energy in fertility then, right, is we're going inward. There is a movement associated with the bleed. Our emotions, are right at the surface, so they might be sensitive. In perimenopause, it's variable. There's a quality of dryness, of mobility. This is where, if you understand the different energetics in Ayurveda, Vata is coming here. And then in menopause, there is a slowing down, and again, inward. So you'll see in every single one, the second stage is more like inward during this clearing phase. Right? The energy of fertility during fertility of menstruation is downward and releasing. Perimenopause is also inward, but there is a depletion. So our reproductive tissues are kind of changing, right? So there's a sense of depletion at that time. And then in menopause, again, it's still inward, but it is about letting go. So here is where then the energy of support comes in. So during this time, it's so important to bring the qualities of warmth, rest, simplicity. So when I talked about last time about how, there is a wrong understanding of why, for example, in certain cultures, women are encouraged, to rest during this time. It's because we are honoring the system, and honoring our bodies and honoring what's going on and giving there's a clearing. So our bodies need the support, during this time. It's not to, control. And then in perimenopause, right, where things are a little bit more erratic, it's important that we bring in the energies of grounding, to contain and to stabilize. And this can be done. So all of these words on the top level of the pyramid can be done in many, many different ways. And this is where we look at each person, and then we see, like, what does, of course, warmth is warmth, but, what is bringing in simplicity, for each person? How best, can we rest for each circumstance and each person? Those kind of things. And again, with menopause, because rhythm in a way is seen as being disturbed, we want to bring in that rhythm. We want to then create nourishment because there is that sense of like depletion that has taken place. So during these phases, this is a way in which we can not only understand what's going on, but then what are the qualities that are present during this time? What is the time asking of us? And then how we can meet that phase. Is this something that you feel you can relate to? Is it clear?
I definitely think, as someone going through perimenopause right now, I'm noticing that need to ground or stabilize during this, because it's almost jarring after years and years and 4 kids, and to all of a sudden have it be a whole different ball game. Yeah. And I do feel it feels a little bit out of control, because I don't feel like I don't feel a need for it anymore. And so then it just feels like it's this out of control moment in my life every month. Yep. And some months not happening, and then it causes stress. And then it's, so I love that, like that there's that need to stabilize because that makes me feel seen at this particular point in my life.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I'm on the I'm in between, the perimenopause and menopause, I'm laughing because it's just funny. Sometimes there are certain definitions that exist in the world. If you don't have your periods for a certain amount of time, then only you get to be clocked into that menopause. I almost reached that stage, and then, like you said, like out of left field, there you go. I'm having a cycle, and interesting enough, Eva, like I guess I was going to share that when that happens, like you said, you're like, oh man, like, what's going on? And is something wrong with my body? But when I started to experience that, I implemented, some practices. And for myself, I did more, like I did some herbs. And I can tell you though, that immediately I noticed a difference. So when I, either took herbs that were grounding or, kind of brought, really connected with the fact, wait a minute, like I feel out of control. I feel like things are happening to me, but wait a minute, they're not. I need to understand this and I need to meet myself. When I did that, I mean, really, like I would tell you almost instantaneously, I stopped getting any hot flashes or anything. So I think the idea is that, and it's not one and done, I did it 1 month and then I can't just say like, oh, well, yay, and now I'm okay. But I think it's a continual understanding again, that there is a cycle. And even if we just meet ourselves emotionally at that place, then it will support biologically. And many of the symptoms that we can experience because of the natural fluctuations that happen in our body, if we support it, the clearing is still happening. It's kind of like when we lose something or when there's a loss or, something challenging happens to us, it's okay to express it. We will get the support. And then, with that support, we're better able to cope with it, right? And then either learn from it or move forward. So I think that it's the same process, in our bodies. So yeah, so thanks for sharing. I really want to be mindful of time, but like I said, I always try to fit in 5 hours of content in one. But moving on to this follicular phase, I will go a little bit faster and maybe just pause so that we can look in this phase and again, the idea is that this exists across all stages. We're oftentimes most and only familiar with the fertility stage, right? But this is where, again, the body is building in the fertility stage, well, in every stage, but the body is building up its estrogen. Then as it's building, there's like an expansive energy. In terms of perimenopause, that expansive energy could not feel contained. So this is, again, Eva, what you were talking about, like the same energy exists, but the container that it exists in is changed. And sometimes as we age naturally, right, it's like the container gets slightly less stable, less able to hold. But that doesn't mean that every woman is going through all these stages is going to experience all the, quote, bad or challenging qualities. If we can actually understand that that's what's going on and provide that container for ourselves, or better that container across all these phases, we will have a better experience during them. And in this case, the energy is more definitely outward, in the building phase. And again, there's this energy of supporting that build. So during building times, this is just like the first slide or the first couple of slides where I talked about, when we are born, and then as we grow in that early stage of life, we're building. We have to nourish. We have to support. We have to give, foods and do things that support that stage of life. That's why we give like heavier foods to kids, like nutrient dense foods. That's why we do activities, or people are learning because they're building themselves. So these are the kind of energetic qualities that we need to do, or that we need to implement, that we need to incorporate in order to support this phase. And oftentimes we don't think about it in that way. So even like when I am troubleshooting for a woman who wants to conceive and she, is either struggling or she's coming in preemptively, which I think is the best time, to think about, hey, I want to really prepare my body, for having a child. So then we really want to look at all of these phases and where, if there's anything going wrong, where can it be supported and how? And this is why so much of the change that I think I am able to help facilitate with women, oftentimes you don't need anything but an understanding. And through that understanding, there are ways in which we ourselves as like humans, as women, as people can support ourselves. And that's why I always say it's so important to cultivate that inner physician. And this is really how to do it. And so then in the ovulatory phase or the expressing phase of our cycle, this is where, in terms of fertility, where we're releasing that egg, very much a warmth associated with this stage. And you'll see, right, that in the beginning, fertility, it's warm, it's expressive, and then we move to perimenopause where it could be a little bit hot. And why I mentioned this, and then I said about the hot flashes and whatnot, is that this variability sometimes can cause, something to go completely to zero, or then all the way to the other side, So you may not have anything, and then you're feeling, like you're in an inferno. And in this particular case, what you will notice in this kind of line is that for both the fertility and perimenopause, there's an outward energy. Of course, for fertility, because we need to connect. Perimenopause, those sensations are still there, but there's sensitivity. So I'm not saying that it is always met with the word volatility, which is quite strong, but just more of a instability, more of a irregularity kind of thing. But in menopause, it's almost that connection goes inward. And that's actually what happened. This is why, when you'll hear women as they get older, when they say like, oh yeah, the 40s are like the best, 50s are the best. Why? Because it's that time where we don't really care about, necessarily what other people think, because that energy naturally shifts inward, and we are doing the cycles then, kind of exist more in terms of supporting ourselves and understanding ourselves. So that's kind of how even then the emotional piece overlays, because these same energetics will influence that as well. So again, in terms of supporting ourselves, right, it's about channeling the energy in terms of fertility and expressing it. In perimenopause, supporting it by balancing, these phases of either heat or irregularity, and give ourselves that. It's like that transition phase. We're still interacting with others, but also then beginning to, like I said, the 40s or where we then go inside and soften. And then when you're in that later stage, bringing in that sense of expression, which is connecting with others in previous phases, to cultivating and supporting that creativity within. And then finally, in the luteal phase or the integrating phase, this is the time where as a baby, then, again, the hormones are fluctuating to be able to support that. At this time, in the integration phase, there's different energies. Again, you're maintaining for a new baby when you are trying to conceive and you've already conceived. In the perimenopause stage, it's it can be again very drying, and then in the menopause we tend to go more inward during that time. So in order for this to happen, again, that energy of holding, that energy of maintaining has to be there throughout. But how does that happen? And a lot of times during perimenopause, why people just feel so out of it, or like, I don't understand what's going on, is because what is supposed to happen, which is holding and support, is not really being met biologically by the body, right, on its own, or could not be, let's put it that way. It doesn't always have to, some women do not have any symptoms. I can say thankfully right now I don't have any symptomology, but that's, you have to actively be able to understand that and then support yourself. And then again, in menopause, a deeply internal phase. So during the time where we are, we're pregnant, we want to support that baby. We want to make sure that this is the time is so important so that miscarriages, for example, don't happen, right? And that we don't have early delivery or, premature labor. So we have to incorporate practices that stabilize, our energies, our body, and that ground ourselves. Then in perimenopause, we really need to make sure that if we do feel depleted, that we nurture and replenish ourselves and that we protect our energy. Again, this is where what happens naturally to many of us is that we say, like, wait a minute, like, I'm not going to engage in all of the external things that are calling my attention because I'm really feeling untethered. And this is why these kind of push-pulls happen in our life, because this is the inner energetics. And then in menopause, that holding comes more from creating, holding, or maintaining through creating meaning about like who we are, ourselves, our lives, etc. So what I wanted to, really just bring us all back to, because, we've been talking about the cycles, we've been talking about the, energies and things like that. But every single one of us goes through these phases of clearing, of building, of expressing, and integrating. And so sometimes they show up as a monthly bleed if, we are in that stage. Sometimes it shows as energy shifts, or mood, or, where we place our energies or our focus. And sometimes it also shows up in our creativity. And sometimes it shows up doing nothing at all. And so for each one of these phases, whether it be fertility and, it's just a very obvious, to us with the bleed and it's cyclical and it's happening, or it's with perimenopause and, where there's a less reliability, and it's, we're starting to kind of learn, from what's going on, or we're in the later stage in menopause and we have to go inward and lengthen. What is very, very important is that we really, again, like I always go back to empowering ourselves by knowing ourselves. And if we are in that clearing phase, we have to do what we can to allow release. If we are in that building phase, we have to give ourselves nourishment, right? So this, in every way, not just one, not just food. If we are in that expressing phase, then we need to be able to create the space for ourselves on all our levels to be able to do that. And then finally, in the integrating phase, we need to be able to honor rest, honor stability, and honor, just being and not doing.
Thank you so much, Viji.
You're welcome. Was it helpful?
Very helpful. I have a lot to reflect on now, I think.
I just feel like we are inundated oftentimes with so much wonderful knowledge, wonderful, information. And we just kind of don't know where it all lands together. I still think, I covered a lot of things and it can still be a little bit confusing. But all is to say, like, if we don't understand every layer, if we just understand four, because it's very small, then we're able to just take a look at ourselves and support ourselves. It just underscores how so very important it is to do that, because the body will immediately respond.
I think I have one question. So in the initial slide, you talked about an overarching thing, right? Where you said your stage one is kapha dominated, and then stage two is pitta, and then stage three is vata. Mm-hmm. And then, am I correct in saying that those stage one, stage two, stage three are basically menstrual, perimenopause, and menopause? Is that?
Yeah,
how it
I mean,
aligns to?
hold on. Let me go back to that slide really quick.
Does
Okay.
it align to the clearing within each stage of, menstrual, perimenopause, and menopause? Does it align to clearing?
It can actually. This is where it can get really, to be honest with you, this is where it can get, confusing. I think I could do a 1 hour presentation on just this slide. When you ask me that question, yes. So, for example, the idea of energies, functional energies in our body and in the universe, that vata, pitta, and kapha, energy of creation, energy of sustenance, and energy of dissolution, that exists, all the time, because our bodies, we are born, and then we have to, we grow, and then we have to obviously maintain our bodies, and then there's a degradation process. So the short answer is that yes, it actually will reflect everything. Within each phase also, there are energetics of vata, pitta, and kapha, because there's always energy within a process itself of, that process starting, that process, being maintained, and that process then it's like a project that you start, that you have to kind of work on, and then you present it and it's done, right? And so it's the same thing, that's really being just mirrored both in ourselves and in nature everywhere. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, yeah.
I know it's,
No,
yeah.
it is correct. The other thing that I also did have is, so in the menstrual cycle, you talk about the holding phase, as when you do have a baby, you're basically supporting that, integrating. So when you're not having a baby, what does that basically integrating kind of morphs into or combines into the building stage, or is that still separate?
Oh, so it's a really good question. So, for example, if you are in your early 30s, but you've had all your children and you're done, right? Even this process is important to support. So because it is reflective of, for example, the hormonal flow that exists in the body, how the brain is how the hypothalamus and the pituitary are communicating to your ovaries, and then your ovaries are saying something. It's still, whether or not you are going to have a baby, your body is still doing that. So you have to support it. And when you support it, you are supporting every other system also that is happening in that thing. So the point here is that we have a reproductive system, but it doesn't exist in isolation. It exists in communication with, and in conjunction with, and in support of, and it is supporting other organs and other systems in our body. So always it is important to support ourselves in particular energetic ways. And this is not energetic as in woo-woo energetic. It is energetic as in, if something is asking me to slow down and to, like nourish myself and feed myself. See, a lot of women are like, what do? They're like, they're restrictive. Let's say, for example, they're thinking, oh my God, I'm too fat. I can't eat this. I can't do that. I want to, so many women, when they're pregnant, so many women come to me and, they're concerned about, I don't want to gain weight. And I'm like, wait a minute, like we need to, healthy brain tissue is from fat. So the myelin sheath is made of lipids. Like we need to be able to have important nutrients in our body. So I guess what I'm trying to share is that irrespective of whether or not there's an outcome to what is happening, the idea here is that we still have to support our body. That's why this talk is important for any woman or any person, but, because it just teaches us that our bodies are so divine and so intelligent, and we need to work with our bodies and not against it. Right. And that's why women, after they've had children, if they're like, man, my cycles are bad, but you know what? I don't care. I'll just endure whatever I'm experiencing. No, that is affecting your bones, your muscles, your nervous system. It's affecting everything.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much, Viji.
Thank you for asking the question. Yeah.
I may have missed this part, but just a quick question on when you mention like sexual tissue, does that include like, discharge that also comes out of the vagina, like all of that is also coming from the bone marrow, basically.
The reproductive tissue is also called artava in Sanskrit, and it refers to like the seeds, sperm and egg. And so when you have discharge, for example, that is going to share with you that is like a reflection of what is going on in the body. As these phases, it's a great question, Kartika. As these phases continue in our body, especially during the reproductive years, the discharge that we experience is going to be different based on the time of the cycle, the phase of the cycle that we are in, and so that is one side. And also the fact that as we kind of go through, this process and we are in, for example, perimenopause and menopause, that there's depletion over time. That's just a natural part of life. So that's why these tissues get depleted, and that's why, for example, women have dryness, vaginal dryness, because they that depletion is there, and that's also a sign, same as having discharge and having different qualities of that discharge, whether it be runny, whether it be kind of thick, white, etc. That the fact that you don't have that discharge also is sharing with you the energetics that happen in the body. So the answer to that question is that the reproductive tissue is the egg and the sperm. The discharge that comes out is reflective and will give you an idea of kind of what's going on in your body, both what phase you're in, as well as what qualities are existing in your body, whether it is very lubricating, and very much kapha, or if it's like yellow, or there's heat associated with it, that there is a heating energy or pitta associated with it. And when you don't have any, discharge, that there is a dryness that exists in the body, and that's influencing that, and that's, more vata.
Wow, so fascinating. Like you said, you're already always getting these signals, or the body's communicating to you. You just got to read it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just convinced of it, I mean, I think for those, so many of us really always want to know why. I always want to know why. And so, but the whys exist. And it exists very, very clearly. It's just a matter of kind of, understanding. But yes, our body is always speaking to us, and we should listen on every level. So we shouldn't dismiss, because when we dismiss, then we're just we are avoiding then the signals that it's giving based on any one of these things. And why do women suffer from osteoporosis? I mean, it's just really clear. It's really clear because also, we're not getting the nutrients that we need, and it's very important. And the body is kind of slowing down, so we need to, support that. So we not only need to give nutrition to the body in terms of the food in this way, but then we also want to do things that are going to activate these organ systems to, rev up again and support us. And, for example, the reproductive tissue in the menopause and perimenopause time, think about it as our greatest creative potential. That's why creativity was put in there. So egg and sperm are our greatest, blessing and reproductive potential, creativity, creation. But then as we go into that phase of not producing egg and sperm, then what happens is that we need to go inward and support that creative potential, because that is also extremely important.
I think that was the most enlightening part of for me was to realize that even though I'm heading into this new phase, that there's still a reasoning for it, and there's still energy I can get from it, and there's still things I can do to help determine how I feel. I don't have to just let it happen to me. I can be an active part of the process. So it gave me a lot to think about in that sense, that instead of just, oh, I'm getting old, this is what's happening. It's, this is what's changing, but that change isn't a bad thing. So
Right. No, change is not a bad thing. We're entering a new phase. And so we are used to knowing what to do to support ourselves in those other phases because that's what everybody talks about. The wonderful thing about the current time is that there is a revolution going on and women are talking about menopause, perimenopause and menopause, which is amazing because we need to understand, and this is, I really hope and believe that this is part of that, dialogue, because like, for example, and you included, I know a lot of women, like I ran my first half marathon when I turned 40. I was so proud. And, but I also recognized that, and I ran a lot, I lost a lot of weight, I looked amazing, but I want to just share that I started to notice other things. And so that doesn't mean that we stop. What that means, and in this talk, I didn't go into it deeply. I have talked about it in the past, but so does it mean that, oh my gosh, I have to stop running because, my knees are hurting but we have to do things that support us. So for example, in Ayurveda, because, bones, like we need to basically lubricate them. We need to give them nourishment. That's what we talked about in those later phases. So doing oil massage is like, and bringing the qualities of that oil inside our body. This is an Ayurvedic practice is so important. So before you go running, so that, you don't wear your body down, then, this is the way that you can do the activities that you want, but also support yourself. So that is how we need to shift our thought process. Not that we're being restricted from something, but rather what's going on, what are the energetics of what I'm feeling, what phase of life I'm in, and what am I doing? And if they are not supporting each other, we don't need to say, oh God, like I can't have, or oh gosh, I can't have this, food, this activity, I can't do this activity. No, but what can I add to that to support me so that my bones do feel strong, that I don't feel pain after I go for a good run, or I lift weights. We have to stretch, we have to do the oil massage, these kind of things. I have to support myself afterwards with good protein and good foods and good nutrients. That is what we need to do. So we have to shift. So it's equally as important. Our menstrual cycles, our bodies are so important. We have to support them in different ways at different times. Because part of this whole process is about community, it's about sisterhood, it's about friendship, and just, sharing and learning from each other, all of us, and then we know that we're not going through this alone, and that sometimes just one change in how we look at something can, really make a difference, in our lives. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Viji. Wonderful, wonderful session. Looking forward to the next one.
Okay,
Thank
you're
you.
welcome. Thank you so much for joining. You guys have a very great day, and I will see you next time.
What is wonderful about this is like, it just shows how much wisdom and knowledge you have, like to be putting it all together, because you could be reading like parts of it and pieces of it, but I don't think it all comes together until, someone as knowledgeable as you can put it all.
Oh my God. Thank you. You're so sweet. You're so sweet. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me. Please join me for next month's Chat with Viji as well.